So a little bit about myself. So I'm a cloud consultant and I'm an Azure solution architect with 11 plus years of experience in cloud technology. I'm 5x Microsoft certified and also a cybersecurity architect in the cloud domain. So that's all about me. If you want to connect with me, this is my email ID and my LinkedIn profile. Nandeep has also given it in the chat section. So connect me for any queries or questions and I would be happy to help you. So let's start with Azure Policy. So what is Azure Policy? Like first, let's go through the agenda. What we are going to discuss today is about Azure Policy. We'll give you an overview of what it is. People get really confused between an RBAC and Azure Policy. So we will discuss about what is the difference between an RBAC and Azure Policy. Then we have what are the elements or the objects in Azure Policy. When you go to the portal, what are the objects do you see and what important terms you need to know if you want to know about Azure Policy. More is the second. Next one is the Azure Policy scope, where actually Azure Policy can be applied. We'll discuss about that. We'll discuss why Azure Policy is benefited for the organization and why you should use it. And then we have a quick demo with 3 policies. I will try to complete that 3 policy if time permits. So let's get started. So with Azure Policy, you might find a very typical definition in Microsoft website about Azure Policy, but I'll tell you in a very simple layman's language that what is Azure Policy, why do we need this. Is Azure Policy is basically a mechanism by telling people what not to do in the Azure environment. When I say what not to do is basically you make configure or deploy all the resources in Azure, but we need to find some governance or restrict users that please don't do these things on Azure infrastructure, or else you will ultimately be in a problem where you will not be able to solve it. So basically, we define policy in this way so that we restrict users that don't make these mistakes in Azure, and that is how we control it. Because even administrators or system administrator, when they have the permissions, they tend to make those mistakes unaware, unintentionally, but which ultimately creates a problem. So we'll discuss and we'll see in examples how what I actually mean by saying what not to do in Azure environment. And currently Azure Policy is used by it is 100% used by all the enterprise users, and it is a very critical part when you design a Azure deployment solutions. It is a part of a maturity deployment. One more important factor to note about Azure Policy, that it's a free services. Azure do not take any cost if you want to configure Azure Policy. So this is absolutely a necessary and recommended solution that you should use Azure Policy in every organization. Even if you have a very small infrastructure on Azure, you should definitely use Azure Policy, and which ultimately helps you to create policies, assign them to resources, and receive alerts in case of non-compliance resources are there. And when we say why do you need this Azure Policy, for multiple reasons we need Azure Policy. For definitely for governance of resource consistency. Then companies have their regulatory compliances to monitor that. In terms of security, how we can secure our resources by using Azure Policy, helping in cost by implementing some tagging policies, and definitely at the end, management of the resources. Um, Next, I'll go to Azure. Differences between Azure Policy and Azure RBAC. If you have used Azure, you know about Azure RBAC. RBAC is basically role-based access control. So what's the difference between Azure Policy and RBAC? So Azure Policy is a mechanism to determine, as I said, what not to do in Azure, control the environment in Azure. But whereas RBAC is to define who will do the task. That is providing access to, if I am eligible to do this, if I am the administrator, if I have the contributor role to do something, or maybe there is a L1 engineer where I don't want to give him the admin access. So RBAC decides, or we decide to give access to which user. So that's what RBAC is. RBAC is nothing to control everything. Azure Policy is mainly focused on the properties of the resources. Properties of the resources means, let's suppose take an example of a virtual machine. So Azure Policy is focused on where is the virtual machine located, what is the size of the virtual machine, what access, like where that virtual machine is being able to access. So Azure Policy focuses on these properties of the resources, whereas RBAC is only focusing on who will access that virtual machine, which are the users who will be able to access that virtual machine. Azure policy is defined within the resource group or subscription or management group as well. So we define the policy there. We will come to know in further slides about when I will discuss about Azure policy scope, where Azure RBAC, as I said, it grant access to users or group within a subscription or within a resource group. We'll go to next. As I said, Azure policy objects. So when you configure or when you want to know Azure policy objects, you will find three very common terms used. And this can be a bit of confusion when you try to configure Azure policy. So I've tried to explain this in a very simple notes and also with the following diagram, which will make your understanding very clear. So with policy definition, the first one is the policy definition. So policy definition is described as single policy about a resource compliance, like why this resource will be a compliant and what effect it will take if the resource is being non-compliant. So when a single policy is defined, it is known as policy definition. For example, restricting the list of location where users can deploy resources. Example, if my company is in India and I want all Azure resources to be in India, we'll create a policy where every user, if they want to deploy resources on Azure, they will only be able to deploy it on India location. Even if they select East US location or a Central Europe location, it will not be able to create resources. That's how we control. And this is a single policy. That's why we call it a policy definition. Second one is an initiative definition. Initiative definition, there's not much difference. Very simple. If there is a multiple policy we want to create, so all the policy together will call itself as an initiative definition. That is, if I read the statement, a collection of policy definition that all contribute towards a specific goal. So therefore, 10 policies created for one purpose is known as initiative definition. For example, there are 164 policies in under one initiative. And what is the initiative name? That is a CMMC level 3. So if my organization wants to be a certified CMMC level 3 company, CMMC is basically cybersecurity maturity model certificate. They will deploy one initiative in Azure, which will contain 164 policies inside it. So basically, very simple collection of policies known as initiative definition. The third element or the object is the assignments. Assignments is very self-explanatory. It describes where we are applying this policy, whether we are applying the policy to a resource group, whether we are applying the policy at a subscription level or at a management group level. So example, we created a policy and we apply it only for a production resource group. That is what we call as an assignment. And in my demo section, I will show you this, that how we can apply our policy to a particular resource group. Okay, we'll go to next. This is again simple, again three objects explained with a diagram. So policy 1, policy 2, policy 3, individual policies are called policy definition. If we combine all three policy and put it into an initiative, that is called an initiative definition. And the last one is assignment, whether we are assigning it to the Azure resource group or we are assigning it to a subscription. Just a pictorial graphics to understand what are the three objects. Azure policy scope. This is very important slide and very important to note that where actually we want to apply the Azure policy scope. So if you look at the hierarchy structure of Azure, how Azure is defined by Microsoft is at the top level is we have a tenant root group. And then that tenant group is divided into different management group. Further, management group are also divided and segregated into multiple subscriptions what users create. The yellow ones are the subscriptions, and then we divide it into a resource group. So the question is, if we want to create a policy, where we want to create that policy, from in which section we want to scope it. So as per recommendations, what we do is, if you create a global policy where you want everyone should follow this policy irrespective of no exceptions, we put that global policy and we assign it to the tenant root group. Let's say, for an example, if I know that my resources are only my offices are only in India and I want all resources to be in India, I will put a global policy onto a tenant root group so that everyone inside this tenant group will have a region location as India. All the resources will be in India. Now, when I divide it into a production and test, there can be some policies which is only applicable to production or the test management group. So we can define that policies only on the production management group or the test management group. Further, again, when we divide it into a production 1 application or production 2 application, let's suppose production 2 has one single policy, which I want only to be applicable on production application. That's my business critical application. So that policy will be only configured on the subscription level. So we have multiple options, and at the end, you can see we can also apply policy on the resource group level, where we want only this resource group should have this policy. So it's very important how you when you create policy, where you actually want to apply the policy. This is very important, and this is very fruitful in nature when you design an Azure architecture, and it comes at this is a very mature type of deployment by choosing what's the scope of your policy. Okay. We'll quickly go to the demo section of the policy in terms of time, because I want to show all the 3 policies. We'll configure 3 policies, and I've in my Azure subscription, I've cleared everything so that I do everything from scratch. So we'll do 3 policies. Number 1 policy, let's suppose we will allow virtual machines with a particular size of an SKU, and will not be able to create any other SKU virtual machine. Second, we will try to create a policy with which requires a tag and its value. Without the tag value, resources will not be created. And third one is very interesting policy, is configure your storage account public access to be disallowed. So we'll create a storage account, and we'll see how policy is disabling the public access even if we want to allow it. So we'll quickly go to the Azure portal. So as you can see, this is the Azure portal, and this is the policy overview section. And you can see that there is no policy created, no resources showing as compliant, non-compliant. So this is absolutely new environment. I'll try to create this. So we'll go to the first. What we'll do is we'll create a resource group. Let's say we'll create a resource group known as production, and we'll simply go and review and create it. So we have our production resource group, and there is no resources as of now deployed to it. So what we'll do is first we'll create the first policy as discussed. So we'll create allowed virtual machine size SKU. So I'll just copy it, and first before creating the policy, I'll show you the policy dashboard. So this is our definition, assignments, and exemptions. So definition is basically what I said is one is policy definition, which is a single policy, and initiative definition, a collection of all the multiple policies into one definition that is called an initiative. So by default, there are thousands of built-in policies which
breaking. Anybody else?
Hello. Hello, Akash, are you there?
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, yes, Akash.
Sorry, my internet dropped off for a minute, so I'll reshare my
Yeah, it's
screen.
okay. Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Let me know if you can see the screen again.
Yes, it's visible.
Okay. Yes. So I was going through this initiative definition. So you can see that this is initiative definitions, and inside this there are so many policies configured inside this built-in initiative. So Azure has already created, and the example which I showed in my slide. So if you see CMMC level 3, so if I click on, let's click on it and show you what exactly is inside this. So this is CMMC level 3 initiative definition, and inside this there are 164 policies already created. So if we want to assign it, we will assign it, and then based on that, our resources will be like following those policies. So let's start with our demo. We will create one new policy, single policy definition. Oh, sorry. So this was our policy, the first demo. Let it load. Yeah, so allowed virtual machine size SKU. So we will create. So we'll have opened this policy and we'll assign it, and we'll see how this policy works. So if you can see this on the below, this is an ARM template kind of thing, and we can actually use this ARM template also to assign the policies. Currently in this demo, we will be only using the GUI. So let's assign this policy now. So assigning this policy, the first important thing is about the scope, as I said. So where we want to apply this policy. Remember, we created a resource group called production. So we will assign this policy to this production one. So we have selected the scope. Other settings should be default. The important next configuration is the parameters. Now it is asking me that which SKU you want to allow. Which your organization thinks that this is the only virtual machine you want people to create it. So let us choose one virtual machine. Let's suppose standard B2S. So if I select this one, and if I click on, I've selected one, and if I click next, if I go into parameters, we'll see that B2S is selected. And in the remediations, we'll not configure remediation as of now. Non-compliance message, let's suppose, right, please select correct SKU. And we'll simply go and create it. So it takes a couple of seconds to create this policy. Now this policy is created, and it is now scoped to the production resource group. If I go to production resource group now, and let's suppose my manager said that, okay, Akash, go and create a virtual machine for me. And I simply want to create a virtual machine. So we'll try to configure a virtual machine. We'll see that whether the policy lets us create it or not. So I'll leave all the default settings just for time concern. So only the subscription is production. Let's give a very simple name to give global Azure one as a virtual machine name, and look at the image. Look at the size. It's default as selected as B2S, but I want to create it as D2S V3 because my manager said that create a virtual machine, but he did not say anything about size. So let us create a size. I'll simply give a username. We'll give one password, and then let all the default settings be like this, and we'll simply go and review and create. So let's see, it will check the validation whether I have done all the settings correctly or not. So what did it said? It said validation failed, and if I did all the settings by default, so why this validation failed? It's clearly saying me that resource global Azure one was disallowed by policy. What was the policy name? Allowed virtual machine size SKU. Reason, please select correct SKU. So even I am the global admin on this subscription, I want to create this virtual machine, but because of the policy, I will not be able to create my virtual machine if I don't select the correct SKU. So why this is important is because if I don't have if this policy was not there, whatever is my like whatever I want to create SKU will create it, and this will create a problem in future that the virtual machines will be on different SKU for different reasons. So for this reason, this policy is very important. Now, if I go to back to basic, will change the size to back to the B2S one, which is the correct one, which I should, which policy is saying that you can only select the correct one. So we'll simply go in. Now, if I check the validation, it should pass, and we will be able to create it. So now the validation is passed, and if I click on create, it will start the deployment and it will create my virtual machine. You'll see the deployment is happening. So as we can see that the deployment has already started, and it will ultimately complete it in a couple of minutes. while it is progressing, let's start the next policy. And this is also related to something like, with virtual machines only, but we'll see how both the policies work together. So the next policy is what we have is requiring a tag and its value on resources. So basically, when we create any resources on Azure, we actually can give a tag, so that when we extract reports from Azure, whether it's for cost report, whether we want to see what are the resources configured, we can actually segregate it by tags. But usually people don't. This is not a mandatory option in Azure that you have to give it a tag. So people tends to forget it. But when they have 500 or 1,000 resources on Azure, and when the management asks for them that give me reports with what are the production resources or what are the development resources, and based on that the billing report should be like we do an analysis of the billings, then we create a problem. So what we can do is, initially when you create anything on Azure, put this policy so that it forces users to put tags. Let's create this policy. Again, go to policy section. We'll go to see your now the policy says that our previous policy is now created, and it says that yes, you have one virtual machine and it is 100% compliant. We'll go to definition now. We'll create one more policy. So it says our VM is now. So I'll choose this policy, require a tag and its value on resources. Again, very simple. We'll go to assign. We will choose the scope. Again, production resource group. In this resource group, we will put our policy will be scoped. We'll go to next. In the parameters, it's asking me give a tag name and tag value which you want users to give it when they want to create a resources in the production resource group. So I'll give environment as the tag name, and tag value, let's suppose we say prod. So any resources created in the production resource group should have a tag name and a tag value as well. We'll simply go, and in a non-compliance message we can write, please write or please provide correct tags. Okay, we'll go to next. We'll create policy. Will create in a couple of seconds again. Now let's go to production resource group. We can see our virtual machine is already created. We'll create one more virtual machine, and we'll see that our previous policy and this policy both are also working together or not. So we'll go to virtual machine. We'll create one more virtual machine and see this time we'll see what happens. So in subscription, it says again our resource group is production. We'll give one more virtual machine name. In the size, let's suppose again choose a different size. So D for S V3, and because the policy says we have to choose B2S in our previous demo, but in this also we'll see that okay, if the policy is working again for this or not. And in the password again, we'll give a simple password. Disk is fine. We'll keep the disk, networking, management, monitoring, and advanced, all the default settings. In the tags also, I'm not giving any tags. The policy says that you need to give a tag, but I'm not giving any tags. So we'll see how what validation error this time I'm getting. Again, validation is failed. And now if I click on validation, it gives me both the errors and both the reasons. First reason is your VM is not allowed to be created is because it doesn't have tags. Please provide correct tags. The second reason is it is also disallowed by policy because you have not selected the correct SKU as well. So both the policies are working. So even if I select correct SKU, it will not let me create it. Even if I give the if I have not given the tags, it will not let me create it. So I have to create both the things correctly. Like all the policies should be followed. So I have to give it B2S. Now once I have corrected in the tags what was the tag value what I want. So environment and prod, both this thing has to be given correctly. Now if I again revalidate that whether it will allow me now, so now it will not give me any errors. Now the validation is passed because I'm creating my virtual machine based on the correct policy. So this way, if we control our environment, by creating these policies, people will not make mistakes. What happens is you create 10 virtual machines and then you find, oh, we haven't selected the correct SKU, or we haven't given the tags. And this creates a very big problem when the environment is big, when we have multiple subscriptions, multiple resource group, and then it's very difficult to remediate everything. There is an option that we can remediate all the previous workloads as well, which is already created. But as I said in the slide, when we design these infrastructure, Azure policy should be part of your designing, and that's what then we call it as a very mature deployment or a mature solution design. So these two were policies I wanted to show. The third one is very interesting one. I guess we have some time, so we'll try to complete that. Configure your storage account public access to be disallowed. So this is related to a storage account, and this is nothing we are saying that you cannot create your storage account. You do whatever you want. You can create your storage account without any policies or without any restrictions. People will be, if I go and ask, let the VM deploy, we'll create one more policy and we'll show you how this works. So we'll again go to definition. So in this one, what we will do is we will not create any restriction that you cannot create your storage account like this. You cannot do like that. What we will do is you create your storage account, but you cannot enable the public access to that storage account. And that because that's a security concern, that this policy was told by my head of security, please create that. Nobody would be, even if they have access, they cannot create a public access to the virtual machine. So we'll create this policy. So again, we'll assign it. We'll assign it to same production resource group. Now, if I go into the parameter section, see, there is no parameter found matching the current filters, or we cannot actually, they don't have any parameter to specify. We just simply can go and create this policy. In non-compliance message also, if we leave it blank, there's no error user will get. They can simply go and create this policy. So we'll go and create this policy. Let the role assignment also get created. So it's created now. This policy might take a couple of minutes to get active. So but till then, that time, what I'll show you is, well, we'll create a storage account in the again production subscription. So let's go to storage account. Our scope was production resource group, so we'll go to production resource group. Let's give a name of the storage account, global Azure prod 1. In East US, it's fine. Networking is fine. In networking, see, I'm selecting enable public access from all networks. Our policy says that you cannot do this, but I will do it, enable public access from all network. And in the data protection is fine. In encryption is fine. Tags, don't forget that we have to give tags in any we create any resources, we have to give tags. So we'll give environment and production. Next review. And the validation is passed, and we'll create the storage account. So even though the policy said that we will not be able to public access should not be enabled, I enabled public access and I wanted to create it, and it did not give me error on the validation. The deployment has already started as well. So we'll see if the deployments fail or it let me create the storage account. It might take a couple of minutes to form. So we see that your deployment is completed. So if I go to resource, I see my storage account is already created. Okay, now if I go to the policy section first, and if I open my policy, which I created, that one, configure your storage account, we'll wait for a couple of minutes to see that if the result is coming here. Go to compliance, and we'll see if it currently says 0 out of 0. So let that storage account comes in here, and we'll see how we'll see how what exactly this policy is doing. I'll open one more portal here, so that I can understand. I'll open the storage account here. if I go to the storage account, this one was our storage account I created. And if I go to configuration, tables, so if you can see here, allow public access is disabled. Though we created our storage account as enable public access, it is disabled because of that policy. Let's enable it. I want it to be publicly be accessed. Whatever my security head is saying, leave him, but I'll allow it public access. I enabled it. It says successfully updated storage account. Let me just refresh it once. See, as soon as I refresh it again, it went to the disabled state. This is a very wrong, like strange behavior from Azure. If I go and enable it once again, as soon as I, let's say, come out of this configuration page, go back to the configuration page, I see that it is again, it went to the disabled stage. So by any means, if we want to even allow public access to be enabled, we created the storage account with enable access. Now I'm manually configuring it to be enable, like enable the public access. It is again and again, like by default, it is going to the disabled stage. It saves, it says that successfully done, but as soon as I refresh the page, it goes back to the disabled stage. This is happening because of the backend policy what is running. So even if people by mistake create storage account which is enabled public access, or somehow if they want to troubleshoot solution and they just allow the public access, what security policy what we have given is you disable public access and there will be no exception to it. So all the storage account what is there in my subscription will by default have all the public access to be disabled. So now you understand like how important is this Azure policy and how great benefits we actually get from the Azure policy, so that we can control our environment. I'll go back to my slides and will end my session by explaining you what is the benefits of Azure policy. So we enforce policy consistency across Azure resources. That means there will be a consistent similar SKU size of virtual machine or consistency region location, multiple types of policy we can create to enforce a consistency among the resources. We can automate the governance at scale. So that means this, I don't need to govern my Azure infrastructure like everybody is doing the same thing or not. This work will be done by my Azure policy. It improves my security and compliance. We just saw that public access is being disabled, so it is improving my security. If it can be a part of my compliance requirement as well, it simplifies my policy management across resources. You can see that via Azure policy, once we create a very defined group policies or Azure policies, it will simplify my management basically. And lastly, we have some policies which we can create for monitor as well, and which we can report that all my policies are showing, all the resources are showing as compliant and non-compliant. So it gives me a real-time monitoring as well, that okay, yes, you have 10 storage account, all our public access is disabled and all are compliant. If by any chance, if any storage account says that it's your public access is allowed, it will show me as non-compliant and I can quickly take on action on that. So these are 5, or I would say only 5 benefits of Azure policy which I am showing, but you can actually take advantage of this Azure policy. And remember, it's free, so you can actually leverage this policy feature of Azure for all your Azure environment, whether it is a small environment or whether it is a huge environment. That's all from my end. Thank you for giving me time and attending this session on a weekend. Thanks to all the organizers, Smita, Kunj, Siddharth, and Nandeep, to giving me opportunity to speak in front of you. You may connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'm very active on LinkedIn. So if you have any doubts, if you have any questions, let me know. I will reply on chat. You can connect me on one-to-one, and happy spreading knowledge to all of you. Thank you everyone. Thank you, Smita. Over to you.